Hi, everybody. And
Hi.
welcome to. Is this our fourth episode of talking to kids about human trafficking? Third or fourth?
I think it's our third. Although time.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Andrea. Welcome to folks who are listening live. My name is Liz Radzicki. I'm with Participate. I am a learning experience designer. I'm an educator and I'm a mom. And I am here as sort of a proxy learner in this conversation with Andrea, who is our expert. And Andrea, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Andrea Powell, and I am the Director of Survivor and Youth Services at Unitas. And Unitas is an organization that works to prevent the exploitation and human trafficking of young people. So our tagline, if you will, is we want to reach kids before traffickers do. I am also the founder of an organization called Corona Rising that works with survivors, and I am also a mom. And I have worked with somewhere around 10,000 kids to talk to them about trafficking. So that's why I am so excited to be here today to kind of pass the knowledge on, if you will.
Yeah, and our previous chats together have been sort of about the issue as a whole, just kind of educating folks about human trafficking and exploitation. What are some of the red flags? What are some of the signs of it? How does it impact survivors? How does it impact communities? What other issues is it connected to? We've heard stories of actual survivors. Last episode, we talked about Leo and his story. And today we're really getting into the meat of how do we start this conversation with our kids? How do we talk about this hard thing with our kids?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes people think, well, my kid will probably already know about human trafficking. They've seen it in the news, but it is a really serious topic. And that's why it's so important that your kid, be it your biological child, your adopted child, your stepchild, a kid in a youth program where you work, foster group home, whomever that child is to you, it's important that they hear from you, a trusted adult, because if you're sitting here watching this show right now, that means you really care about kids and you really care about the issue. So I thought I would start with a little bit of like a recap on like what is human trafficking so that we're all kind of on the same page. And then we'll take it from there. But human trafficking is a crime against a person or a group of people. It is something that happens to adults. It can happen to kids. It can happen to men, women, children. Really, anyone can be a victim, but the core of human trafficking is it's based on vulnerabilities that somebody or a group of people have, and someone's willingness to exploit those vulnerabilities for their own profit, the trafficker. And so trafficking can be broken down into two buckets, if you will. You have labor trafficking, so that's like domestic work, agricultural work, candy selling crews, like the story of Leo. And then you also have sex trafficking. And for adults, sex trafficking is a form of sex that has a commercial component, and the trafficker is using force, fraud, or coercion to compel that victim to comply. When you're talking about a kid, though, and here at Unitas, we're talking about kids don't have to prove someone forced, tricked, or threatened them in order to show that they're a victim of trafficking. Just the fact that they're involved in any form of commercial sex already automatically makes them a victim of sex trafficking if there's that third party trafficker. So for kids, you have the trafficker, you have the victim, the kid, and you have the buyer, if you will. And so you also have commercial sexual exploitation when you have a child who's engaging in commercial sex, but there's not a pimp, there's not a trafficker, but the other person who's having sex with them is somehow giving them something, a place to stay, money, food, but that person is still exploiting that child's vulnerability. It's not, commercial sexual exploitation is not like less horrible than sex trafficking. It's just a slightly different modification. So now that we have kind of a fly by the seat of your pants version of what trafficking is. And I will say that we do have a previous episode, our first episode, if you want a deeper dive, and you can also learn a lot more with our full parent guide, which you'll have access to at the end of the show. But so let's get started. Unless, Liz, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to encourage people to post questions. So folks are watching from YouTube, from Facebook, from Twitch, whatever platform you're using to watch. Please share questions. I have a million questions, but I want to definitely give room to other people who have other questions as well. So you can put those in the comments, and we'll make sure that they get either discussed here during the episode, or we'll give you the link to our community discussion where you can connect with Andrea after this.
Awesome. Episode. Yeah. And so to start with, as I mentioned, I have worked with somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 kids to talk to them about what human trafficking is. And my colleagues at Unitas have also talked to thousands and thousands of kids. So we're taking all the information that we've learned as facilitators, as educators, as advocates in the field, and sharing from that perspective. So I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. There's a lot more information you can get around difficult conversations with kids, but this is really based on those lived experiences. And also working with some really amazing young advocates to better understand, well, what works for you? You know, how did this information feel to you? And I've also worked with facilitators who seemed like they were ready, and then they weren't, and they basically became fainting goats and went dead in the classroom. I was like, uh-oh. So we want to make sure that, you know, the first thing is like moving at your own pace. So if you are learning about this issue and you're thinking, I'm going to talk at Tuesday at 6 o'clock is when I'm going to like go into my son's room and have the talk. But say that Tuesday, you know, you get in a disagreement with a coworker, you get a flat tire, whatever, you're riled up, you know, basically you're not in a good place. I wouldn't do it. There's no magical, like, you don't have to do it right now type of situation. Like, get yourself ready, feel knowledgeable, and realize that this isn't just a one and done conversation. You're going to continue to have this conversation. And it's not just about like, is your kid at risk? But this is actually an opportunity for you to learn about the issue, for you to learn more with your child about what they know, what they're hearing. And frankly, together, you might start being able to see things in your community and report possible situations of exploitation to the national hotline. You might end up wanting to volunteer for an organization that helps survivors of trafficking. So there's so much more to this conversation than thinking like, I'm coming in here to like tell my kid about this so that it doesn't happen to them. And I've also worked with a number of survivors and have all different kinds of family backgrounds. So you're going to want to start again, you know, feeling like you're in a good place. I'm not saying you have to like meditate for 20 minutes, but just feel calm. I mean, you actually could meditate. The next thing is like thinking about like, what are triggers for you? So here's an example. One of my triggers, for some reason, I can't stand it when I hear that a kid doesn't have food at home. It like really bothers me. And so I know that about myself, and I know stories that involve kids who are, you know, conversations with the kids who are talking about not having food at home. I know that I could get emotional, and I have to kind of be aware and walk into that. So we've all had experiences, good and bad. So even just jotting down like, okay, here are a few things that trigger me, or even could be, you know, that being around too much social media and like having too many things going on as you're having the conversation, maybe that even is triggering for you. So just identifying that and really, you know, feeling that you can walk through that. And then the next thing is, you know, thinking about the fact that human trafficking, I like to say, is the really bad icing on an already horrible cake. And that cake is made up of neglect, homelessness, child abuse, unrest in a community, gender-based violence, structural racism, all kinds of bad stuff. So, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times there's assumptions about who can be a victim, who can't be a victim. You know, maybe it's only poor kids or kids who run away from home. And so there's a lot of like wanting to push the issue away. So a lot of times when we're thinking about bias, about who a victim of trafficking might be, there's actually something interesting in psychology that a psychologist once told me that really stuck in my mind. And that is, especially for kids, but also for adults, we don't want to think that the world is crazy and that anything can happen to us or to people we love. And so if we blame the victim and it's their fault, then the crazy scary is contained in them, and we're safe because we would never leave home, or we never went through those things, or, you know, we don't come from that community or that background. So really, you know, I encourage you again, go take a look at our 101 on trafficking, look at the risks, the red flags, the realities of who victims are. You can also visit a number of websites to kind of unpack bias, and also go to the National Human Trafficking Hotline's resource page on their website and read about victim stories there as well. And also looking at Unitas, unitas.ngo, and reading stories and learning statistics there. I don't want to overwhelm you, feel like you have to do a ton of work, but just be mindful of those bias, because that's going to be something that you and your child are going to want to talk about. So something that this will be kind of after that initial kind of one-on-one conversation with your young person, where you sit down and you have snacks. Like, I was joking that you should have snacks with a friend when you talk to your kids about serious topics, but for real, have snacks. And make it a comfortable environment. Like, is their favorite place to chill on the couch? Have the conversation on the couch. Do you notice that you and your kid have really good conversations when you're on a walk or doing yoga? Totally. So, it's really just an interesting thing to think about. Like, how do you build like a kind of a bubble, with you and your kids, so that you can have that conversation and not have the world going crazy, especially, right now, like, kids are at home, they're stressed, and you think like they've already got a lot going on, but now it's actually the perfect time to build those bonds and relationships, because we're all kind of going through something crazy with a pandemic. And so kids are going to have a lot of questions and, frankly, time on their hands. So, those are some things that I've jotted down that work for me. And I'm going to pause and see if anyone has any questions. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about just some basic communication tips with young people that I've picked up, and actually, colleagues of mine have also said worked for them as well.
Yeah, so if you've got questions, definitely share them in the chat on the platform that you're using to watch this. As we wait for a couple questions to come in, I think I have this larger question about readiness. And so you've given some really great insight in terms of like moments, like choosing your moments and making sure that like there's not external stresses happening, or they're mitigated as best we can. But I think in terms of developmental readiness, how do we know when our kids are developmentally ready to have these conversations? How do we know that we are ready to have those conversations?
Right.
And I guess, like, is that even the right question to ask? Yeah.
So, very meta.
Yeah.
So how do we know our kids are ready? So this guide, Lights, is really designed for parents and caretakers of young people aged 11 to 18. Now, I am working with another organization to develop a guide for younger kids, and I have a younger child. So that's a slightly different conversation. The way you're going to approach something with a 9-year-old versus a 15-year-old, or even an 11-year-old and a 17-year-old, is going to be really different. But the thing is, if your kid is online, if your kid is spending any time on their own, your kid is already being exposed. They're already hearing about these topics. I had a 9-year-old approach me the other day and say adults were sneaking into her video games. I was like, well, how do you know they're adults? And she's like, they use big words that I don't understand and other kids don't know. So I know they're an adult, and then I block them. And, my gut instinct was like, I'm going to delete that game off of her little iPad. But, the reality is you can't shield kids forever. You have to trust them, that they're ready, and trust that they know that you're having this conversation because you care about them. And so there's a lot of like, seeing like kind of where your kid's at. If you've got a kid who's 11 and up, though, it's time to approach that conversation from the perspective of, this is something I'm learning about, something that matters to me. And I really want to talk with you so that you know more about it. And maybe you know some things that I don't know. You might be really surprised. Who knows? Your kid might have been watching all kinds of like human trafficking documentaries late at night, but the truth of the matter is that they probably picked up a lot of information from like news stories or movies. I know I can't see anybody's show of hands, but people watching, many of you have probably seen that movie Taken 2, Taken 3. The thing about Taken is it gives this impression that only people who are kidnapped and completely held against their will can be victims of trafficking. And the reality is that's not true. Most victims don't appear to be completely controlled because we don't see the psychological torment. We don't see the threats. We don't see what's happening. And frankly, not to scare people listening, but your kid can actually be exploited through online exploitation, webcamming, and otherwise, and still be living in the house next, with you. So it's really important to like break down the facts. So I have this saying that's it's how you look when you say something. So if again, if you're not in a good place, like abort mission, circle back. But if you're noticing that you're tensing up or that you're getting teary, there's nothing wrong with that. No judgment, but you can actually say the words, hey Tom, or hey Susie, I didn't realize I was going to get this emotional about this. I'm going to take 5. Let's go grab a glass of water or just chill. We'll circle back in a minute. And that way you're teaching your kid it's okay to have the feelings, right? It's okay to have the feels, and it's okay to even say it, because we're taught that we have to like hold all that in or like be super parents. What your kids really want is a partner on their journey of becoming an adult. They want to know you're right there and you've got their back. They're not looking necessarily for a superhero. So you don't have to be one. So yay. And then, also like meeting your kid where they're at. If your kid does not want to talk about this and just wants to do something else, it's okay to say, hey, I realize this didn't turn out to be a great time for you, or you're having a bad day. We do need to talk about this. Like, let's come to an agreement together about what's going to work. And there's a woman named Amy Creedy. I think she's on the Today Show, and I stumbled upon one of her shows about parenting, and she talks about the fact that kids have 2 buckets: the power bucket and the attention bucket, and they need those to be filled with good power and good attention. And if they aren't, they will seek ways to fill those buckets with bad attention and bad power. And that means getting attention from someone online who is pretending to care about them. Traffickers are really good at identifying a lonely kid. Girls who are posting a bunch of like selfies and talking about, am I pretty? That's not wrong. I'm not judging, but a trafficker might see that and say, this kid's looking for attention and isn't getting it at home. I'll fill it. Or around power, if a kid feels like, I don't have any power to decide like what I'm going to wear, or what I'm going to eat today, then they're going to start finding other ways of getting that power and control, that freedom. I see a lot of this with kids who are living in like state institutional care or, in foster care, where they feel out of control. They didn't choose to be where they're at. They don't want to be there. So they start leaving. They start trying to do things to reclaim a sense of power, because everyone wants that, even babies. So, thinking about your kid on that, that spectrum of just really thinking like this is your partner. This is someone who you're both learning together. And I make it a point when I'm talking to kids about this issue just to say things like, wow, you've really opened my eyes about your perspective. I really appreciate that. Tell me more. And then, using that power language, like, I believe that's how you feel, or I believe that this is what's going on right now. And it's just a really, I think it's really important to put that power language in play, and just really think about what you're hearing. And so here's something interesting, and I don't know if it's just me or someone else, but I find that when I talk to young people about trafficking who I think are like nowhere near at risk, like everything's fine, they often will come to me and say, yeah, I have this friend at school, has an older boyfriend, and I've noticed they're acting different and dressing different. Like, do you think that could be trafficking? Or, I see this kid coming to school wearing the same clothes every day, and he looks kind of dirty. And I saw him downtown, like trying to sell water bottles. Like, do you think he's okay? Or this is something someone said to me on the bus, and it kind of made me feel uncomfortable. So really listening to those conversations and saying like, let's work this out together. If it's someone else, it's another kid in your class or a kid you've seen, let's see if we can find, the National Trafficking Hotline and make a report, or talk to the school counselor, but coming up with a plan together. I've been in situations where I've actually had to make what's called a mandated report. So many people are mandated reporters if they suspect or see any type of child abuse, be it verbal, physical. So one of my first, actually, I think it was my very first time in the United States where I was talking to a group of girls at a very beautiful elite girls' school in Rhode Island about trafficking. And everybody's like, clap, 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 clap. All the girls ran away to go to lunch, except for one girl came up to me and disclosed that she had been sexually assaulted by a group of boys from another school earlier, and that she was being bullied by other girls to not tell anyone about it because they were afraid that then like these kind of co-ed school dances would get canceled. So she was like, I'm just going to tell you, and then walk away. And I was like, actually, I have to make a mandated report. But I ended up sitting there with her for 6 hours in the school, and we ended up making the report together. And it was a lot of that, using that power language and helping her understand what she experienced wasn't her fault. Now, it wasn't a trafficking situation. And I have had kids in classrooms come up to me and say, this is happening to me, or it's happening to a sister. This is your kid. So the chances that that's going to happen to you aren't that high. But just remember, when your kid is sharing with you, sharing is trusting. People say sharing is caring. When your kid is sharing, that means your kid is trusting you. And you have an opportunity to support them emotionally, to help them, show that you believe them. Like if you just say, oh, it's probably nothing, what your kid is hearing is, they don't believe me. And that gets back to the power thing. You're going to immediately thereafter see them take a power grab in some other way. So it's really about just figuring out that balance. So, these are some of the things that I've picked up along the way. Liz, I know you've had some questions too that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my big questions walking into this conversation was like, is it okay to be a co-learner with my kid about this? A lot of times as parents, we want to have all the answers, and we want to, especially for hard conversations, we want to kind of give them a sense, like build that trust through like, well, I can take care of you, and I know about this and that kind of thing. And that's just for a lot of us is just not the case with this particular issue. So it sounds like what you're saying is it is okay to be a co-learner with our
Absolutely.
kid, and to be really open about that and have that actually give power to our kid of like, let's learn about this together. What a great question. I've never thought about it that way. And even just that action in and of itself of being a co-learner with our kid can help to build that power that you're talking about. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand that kids are resilient. Yes, they're fragile, and obviously kids are more vulnerable toward trafficking in many ways than adults, because they can't, or they should not be out there working at the age of 10 or 11 or 13. They should be in school. And kids kind of have their own world, with other kids. And I see that with my little girl who's quite young, but I will see her, she doesn't know I'm watching, I can see her interacting with other kids. I'm like, she's like a whole other person than when she get around me. And so that also, plays out with teenagers as well. And, understanding that they have a lot to contribute. And I think that that's really, really exciting. Like if your kid has a question about trafficking, you don't know the answer, honestly, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, or Google look on our Unitas website. But doing it together, then like the next time your kid has a really important issue, like she sees something with another girl, instead of like trying to solve it on her own and maybe getting overwhelmed in the process, she'll know, hey, I can go to my mom or my dad or my youth worker, or whomever's watching, and we're going to do it together. We're going to figure this out together. And that's really super powerful. And it's going to turn it's going to turn your relationship as your kid becomes an adult into a real partnership, and not this situation where things get hidden because it's too dark or too scary, or you don't think it's going to happen. So that's my take on it.
We had a question earlier about curiosity around how kids talk to their friends about this issue, or how when we sort of start this conversation with our kids, how might they go then talk to their own friends about that? How have you seen that play out? And then kind of the other way back, which is how do we help our kids feel comfortable coming to us with issues in their friend group?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, here at Unitas, we are going to be working on a peer-to-peer guide. We're sort of logistically flummoxed about that at the moment because of the social distancing and pandemic. But you know, the first curriculum that I worked on around trafficking was called Tell Your Friends, and that's literally because we wanted kids to go tell their friends. So we were pretty clear about this. But what I've seen is that kids will share what they've learned, particularly on social media. So one tool as you're going through this guide is we have these comics that we've created at Unitas that are like meant to be kid friendly. They're consumable in video, on Instagram, on slides. You can find them online on our Participate community as well, which I hope everyone will join. What I found is like kids will talk about like, oh my gosh, did you see that comic, or did you see that issue, or this is something else saw going on, or like we would hear kids saying like, I see something in my neighborhood, or there's this girl who's always dressed kind of like skimpily, and she's like walking around at night, and I kind of see her out my window, and like, is that something, and then another kid will pitch in and say, yeah, I've seen that too. And so it's that's part of that. But I also think that using visual aids, and kids love, any kind of Instagram. Like I figure out, I think I've mastered like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I'm like currently in a state of denial about using TikTok, but that those are all like places where kids are going to learn and share information. And frankly, traffickers use those spaces to lure and sell their young victims. So my thinking is, okay, that space exists. Kids are going to be there. Let's fill it with good information to counterbalance the negative ways in which traffickers and exploiters are taking advantage of kids being online more now than probably they've ever been.
In the last couple of minutes that we have together, I think I have two other questions. I mean, okay. One is, and maybe they're connected.
Okay, go for it.
Maybe you can connect them. So one is just, given how entangled this issue of human trafficking and exploitation is, and all of these other big issues around poverty and discrimination and immigration, homelessness, all these other issues, how do we kind of find a balance with our kids, and what should we aim for in terms of answering those complex questions and showing those complex connections without losing focus on the topic at hand? And part two is that an opportunity to help keep this conversation going and open. You talked earlier, this can't be a one and done. We can't have one conversation with our kids about human trafficking and exploitation and expect, well, now they know everything's, that now they have the tools in their tool belt. So how can we keep that conversation as an open door over time?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question, or a couple of questions. So, in terms of like talking about other issues, I honestly say lean in. You are talking about the issue of trafficking, and you want to stay focused on that, but talk about the concerns around immigration and why immigrant youth are at risk toward trafficking in unique ways, or talk about homelessness and the fact that there are over 40,000 homeless kids a night with nowhere to go in the United States. And how can that be possible? I remember my daughter, when she was about 4, we live in DC, and she was seeing some homeless folks who were out and about, and she said, why are there all these homeless folks, but I see places that are empty that they could live in? Why can't they live there? That's an hard question. And pretty, but leaning into those conversations and talking to your young people about the whys. And then this is kind of a side note, but I like to frame things when I'm talking to kids, particularly younger kids, more like, I heard this story, or let's sit down and look at this comic. This is actually based on like someone's real experience. I've heard about this. What would you do if something like this was happening to someone that you know? So I would talk about somebody and not like, what would you do if this happened to you? Because then the kid's like, it happened to me, and then everybody gets all emotional, boop, shut down. And so it's, framing it like, oh my gosh, like, look at what we're seeing. These are really serious topics. I'm so glad that we're figuring out together what's really going on.
Well, and
And
bringing
then,
that power language back into it too, of like, and we've seen this with kids as, as young as 4 and 5. If they want to make a difference, they want to like make a positive difference in the world. And so even connecting those two pieces, I can see can build that power for them.
yeah, like what do you want to do on the issue? Like asking your young person, like, is this a cause that like speaks to you? Because like I remember Willow Smith, who's Will Smith's daughter, she actually got her parents, Jada and Will, involved in the issue of trafficking because she heard about it through friends and she was passionate about it. So you never know, this could be something that you and your kid could really bond on through, like, say, packing up some of their clothes and donating it to a youth shelter where kids are at risk or have experienced exploitation, or doing a letter writing campaign, or writing their representative and saying, like, I learned about this issue and this is what's happening in our state. What are you doing about it? So those are, especially for older kids, this is an advocacy opportunity, and giving them that power to do something and sharing with them, like, for as many people who are exploiting kids or taking advantage of kids, there's a lot of people out there who want to make a difference, who are actually helping kids. So there's a lot of good out there too. And people ask me, like, how do you work with survivors all the time? How do you deal with this topic day in and out? Don't you get depressed? Like, no, it upsets me, but I feel good when I go to bed at night because I know that I've been a part of something bigger than me, and I'm using what I'm seeing to help others. And I think kids, or everybody, but kids really want that. It makes them feel so good. Like my daughter, circling back to her, after she started noticing homeless people, she started carrying little goldfish packs in her bag and handing them out to homeless people. I don't know if they really wanted the goldfish, but it was really cute to see, like, how excited she would just prance after she did it. And on a much bigger level, your 16-year-old wants to hand out the mythical goldfish as well. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. One of hope and power.
Absolutely.
So I thank you so much to everybody who joined us across all of the different platforms. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Unitas. Sure. And we will be back in 2 weeks with another survivor story, I believe.
Yes, we're going to talk about
Lacey. Yeah, yeah. So we hope that you join us for that. Definitely. I know we're sharing out the link to the parent and caretaker guide, how to access that. And that's really the best way to get involved in the community that Unitas runs, and ways to get on the in the discussion to keep this conversation going. So thank you to everybody, and we will see you in another couple weeks.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Bye.